Hi, this is Sunny, back with another video, finally. Actually, this should have been released about a month ago, but life's gotten in the way, so sorry for that. But better too late than never. Today I would like to talk about Hasbro once more, but next time I will talk about something else. This is not a video about the current issues they have with Wizards of the Coast's Magic the Gathering, or about the open game license issue regarding Dungeons and Dragons. I think this has been covered by other YouTubers quite well. So today I would like to talk about their releases of Dungeons and Dragons action figures. But before I continue with the main topic, I would like to explain some terms which might come up in my video and some of you might not be familiar with. The first term would be role-playing game. What is a role-playing game? Well, it is a game played by a group of people, usually between 4 and 6. Technically, you can play with more than 6 players, but that bears the risk that some players might get neglected as they can't take that many actions, and some players might be more dominant. Playing with less players means that you have a smaller think tank at the table, which can provide problems when it comes to puzzle solving, riddle solving. Pretty much role-playing is like virtual troubleshooting. One of the players usually is the game master, who tells like an interactive story, interactive in that the other players can participate by controlling their characters' actions. Their characters are usually generated at the beginning of an adventure or a campaign, and the stats of these characters are documented on a character sheet. Pretty much like, maybe from video games, Elder Scrolls, or various Dungeons and Dragons video games which are also out there, or any other computer role-playing game. Works the same way. In order to have a challenge, certain actions or uses of skills are determined by a dice roll, which means that the outcome is randomized. For further information, I suggest checking out any live streams of role players which you can find on YouTube or Twitch. Let's move on to the next term, Dungeons and Dragons. Dungeons and Dragons was first published in 1974 by Tactical Studies Rules. The head of the team, or supposed to be the head of the team, Gary Gygax, is still considered the father of D&D. Tactical Studies Rules was bought by Wizards of the Coast in 1997, who were then bought by Hasbro in 1999. That's why they are holding the license card. And the third and last term would be campaign setting. The campaign setting is basically the fictive world where the adventure or the campaign takes place. In case of Dungeons and Dragons, you have multiple settings, mostly fantasy or high fantasy. Gary Gygax's own campaign setting would be Points of Light, also known as Greyhawk, which was the basic or default campaign setting from the 1st to the 4th edition. For the 5th edition, Wizards of the Coast chose to make Forgotten Realms the new default campaign setting. Forgotten Realms was designed by Ed Greenwood, and as of now, it's the most developed campaign setting there is for Dungeons and Dragons. And there are numerous video games or computer games throughout history like Eye of the Beholder, Baldur's Gate, or Neverwinter Nights, which helped building its popularity. There are many more other campaign settings like Ravenloft, Mystara, Dark Sun, Spelljammer, but I do not want to get into detail with those. Of course, there are other role-playing games dealing with other settings. There can be sci-fi, can be cyberpunk, steampunk. There can be low fantasy, can be like superheroes, vampires and werewolves, or even mixed, like the role-playing game Shadowrun involves cyberpunk and fantasy in a future Earth setting. And of course, there are role-playing games featuring popular franchises like Lord of the Rings, Star Wars, Warhammer, you name it. Now, when I watched the TV show of Dungeons and Dragons for the first time in 1991, it had been a bummer for myself. Not that the show itself is bad, but I was simply used to something else. I had been playing D&D for about 2 years, and 1 year before I saw the show, my friends and I were intrigued by the novels of the Dragonlance Chronicles by Margaret Weis and Tracy Hickman. Dragonlance also had become its own campaign setting using Dungeons and Dragons rules. The story takes place on a fictional world called Kryn, where the forces of evil rise in order to conquer the world. Typical story. The main antagonist being Tachisis, also known as Tiamat the Dragon, which was used, by the way, in the Dungeons and Dragons cartoon. Similar to the Fellowship in The Lord of the Rings, you also have a companionship of people who set out to save the world, with the main protagonist being Tanis the half-elf, the two distinct twin brothers, Caramon and Raistlin the Year, one of them, Caramon, being strong, healthy and charismatic, and a fighter, while Raistlin is an intelligent, cunning and foresighted wizard. The priestess Goldmoon and her protector and lover Riverwind, Sturm Brightblade, or maybe Sturm Brightblade, since his first name could also be read Sturm, which is the German word for storm or also assault, or maybe has a relation to charge, like when soldiers charge one another, the charge is Ansturm. But I go with Sturm Brightblade. Then there is Flint Fireforge the dwarf, Tasselhoff Burfoot the Kender, which is a race similar to halflings, and Lorana Kanan. Long story short, having faced the more mature nature of Dungeons & Dragons inside the novels and within the game itself, the cartoon wasn't all that exciting for myself. Now, some people might argue that the show was meant for kids. But if so, what about cartoons like The Legend of Prince Valiant, which was also meant for kids? And despite some animation glitches, I find this show much better and much more interesting than what the Dungeons & Dragons cartoon had to offer. Now, regarding Hasbro. Hasbro released the very first D&D character in 2020, namely Drizzt or Urden, or also known as Drizzt or Urden. There are many kind of pronunciations out there, and I think Robert Anthony Salvatore, who is the creator of Drizzt, never actually explained somewhere how the name is pronounced, so I think that's open to interpretation. As mentioned, this character is a main character out of the books of Robert Anthony Salvatore, namely the Dark Elf trilogy. He's also well known for the Icewind Dale trilogy, all of these taking place in the Forgotten Realms campaign setting created by Ed Greenwood. The figure set included his companion Guinevere, as well as his swords or scimitars, Icing Death and Twinkle, some freezing effects, since Icing Death at least is a sword with a magic cold effect. You have the statuette, which is used to call Guinevere, since she's not a natural beast but a spectral one from another plane. And you have the pendant, which is used by Drizzt to call his unicorn Andahar. I found the action figure to be pretty well done and offered for a fair price, although many fans complain about Drizzt's skin being not entirely black. Instead, they chose a light purple. I can see this from a creative aspect or an aesthetic aspect, since it would not discern his skin that much from his armor. Now, this release gave me some hope that they will continue this trend and releasing more and more popular figures out of the Dungeons & Dragons campaigns, like Elminster, for example, or Jalaxle Benre, or Drizzt companions, the Barbarian Wolfgar and Bruno the Dwarf. But instead, they released half of the cast of the Dungeons & Dragons animated TV show in 2022. Bobby and Uni, Hank, Diana, Venger, and the Game Master. Now, when I saw these figures, it filled me with the same disappointment that I had in 1991 when I saw the cartoon for the very first time. But my actual déjà vu of disappointment comes from the coincidence that Hasbro released those figures the same year they released the new Dragonlance adventure module for the role-playing game. And to top it all off, they announced a Dungeons & Dragons movie coming 2023, which gave me another déjà vu. And I'm pretty sure this new adaptation from 2023 will make the same mistakes as the previous one did. A weak plot and a cast chosen for the ominous modern audience. For 2023, they announced a couple of characters from the upcoming Dungeons & Dragons movie, which personally do not interest me either. Now, in my opinion, a better strategy would have been to release the campaign of Shadow of the Dragon Queen with action figures based on the Dragonlance saga, as well as maybe a TV show of the Dragonlance trilogy produced by HBO, since they already have enough experience thanks to Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon. And of course, with the TV show, it would be wise to stick to the actual lore and source material, unlike Amazon tried to pull it off with the Rings of Power, which should have made abundantly clear that there is no modern audience to worry about. To be fair, there was an attempt to bring the Dragonlance saga on the big screen via animated movies back in 2008. However, this was not well received due to very lackluster sound and animations quality, and the problem with compressing a whole novel into a 90-minute movie. And even the celebrities cast like Kiefer Sutherland or Lucy Lawless couldn't compensate those weaknesses. The reason why I think this strategy would have been superior is of reciprocal marketing. Basically, each product would have promoted the other. TV show, the action figures, the books, or the adventure module, bringing more people into D&D gaming, and vice versa. And it had already been done in the past, when the Dragonlance trilogy had been released. SSI, or Strategic Simulations Incorporated, released a number of games based on the Dragonlance novels, with one of my all-time favorites being Dragon Strike, a simulator where you actually ride a dragon and joust against others. Now, if I were you, Hasbro, I would immediately get into talks with Margaret Weis and Tracy Hickman, as well as maybe HBO or Amazon, and think about releasing a toy line or action figure line based on the Dragonlance characters. Since it would not also feature a handful of heroes and just one villain like the cartoon does, but instead you have a whole group of heroes as well as multiple villains such as Verminard of Nidus, Lord Zorth the Death Knight, Kitiara Ufmata, the half-sister of Caramon and Raistlin, Fistandantilus the Wizard, here seen in a fight with Raistlin, and of course Tachisis, the Evil Queen, or the Dragon Queen. In her human form, that is. And of course you could produce and release the various Draconians for army building. Since you're still a multi-billion-dollar company, I think it's not too late to alter the course. But I suggest you do it now, while the iron is still hot. Thanks for watching. Hope to see you again next video. Bye for now.